The MOBA, or Multiplayer Online Battle Arena, has quickly rose to prominence as one of the most popular and lucrative gaming genres around. In this episode, we will explore not only the genre's meteoric ascension, but also many aspects of it that makes it so addictive, challenging, and exciting. Welcome, guys, to the Limit Breakers podcast. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Limit Breakers podcast. As I mentioned earlier, we are doing the MOBA genre today, but we're going to be talking primarily about Dota and Dota 2, because I think we have the most experience with that. Before we get into all that fun stuff, I'm actually here with Steve today. Justin is absent because he's not the biggest of Dota players. But before we get into the main episode, we want to introduce you to some guests that we have on today. But before we do, Steve, how's it going?
Oh, it's fantastic, Cam. Thanks for asking, as always. You're ever concerned about my well-being.
I am indeed. I take full credit there. But the two guests we have on today are actually old friends of ours that were really well suited to be on this episode because of all the funniest memories we probably shared together, gaming related. At least a handful of those are Dota memories, and it's going to be fun to rehash some of those and also just talk about the genre and that game in particular. So without further ado,
before we introduce them, which of them would you say is the better Dota player?
I feel like my opinion about that just has primarily to do with who's kill-stealed me more. So, in that case, I'll probably say, actually, it's probably a dead even tie.
All right, let's hear who they are.
They are Andrew and Michael. What's going on, guys?
Howdy.
Hey, what's up?
Andrew and Michael are brothers. Andrew, I've been friends with and game with for going on about 20 years now, and Michael, who would have been, I guess, 1 or 2 when I met Andrew, I've been gaming with for probably 15 years at this point, since he was, I think, too young to even really comprehend what we were playing. So we have quite an illustrious gaming history together that extends back through a bunch of stuff, but online gaming, especially MOBAs, RTS type games, have always been a big staple of that. And these guys actually probably know a bit more and have played quite a bit more about this genre than I have. So I think they're going to be really valuable guests on today. Before we get into the actual meat of the episode, we like to start off talking about what we've been playing recently. I'm going to be kind of a broken record here because I'm going to be talking about Super Metroid again. But Steve, why don't you start off real quick just so I'm not the first one to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So, 2 games that I've been playing that I did touch on last time. Fallout 4, fantastic game. Really, really enjoying the immersion of that game. And then also, of course, Dragon City, as I mentioned earlier, is a type of incremental mobile game. Pretty popular today. And like a modern day Pokemon. So that's been a lot of fun. I also got excited when I read about the upcoming release of Civilization 6, actually. As you know, I'm a huge follower of that series, and we'll be looking forward to see what it will offer.
That you've been trying to get me into for quite some time, and I've heard only
unsuccessfully.
I've heard only good things, but I have yet to give it a try. But it is supposed to be pretty cool from everything I've seen. I actually beat Super Metroid between our last recording and today.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah, so that I'd have something different to say and be able to move on to something new. Really fantastic game. It was one of those sort of must-play, must-beat titles for me, and it really lived up to everything I thought it was going to be. So if you haven't played it and you're interested, I absolutely recommend it. Maybe on a future episode, I'll talk a bit more about why I liked it so much. But all in all, just a really awesome game. Played it on the 3DS. It's downloadable there, so check it out. Now, before I ask what Andrew and Michael have been playing, I want to ask Andrew, why do they call it the wheelbarrow position?
I don't think anyone actually knows the answer to that question, but
yeah, I was bringing him on primarily to get that answer.
I'll show you later.
Okay. So you guys been playing anything recently, or just kind of mixing stuff up?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I've been actually, it's funny that you brought me on here for this episode. I've been playing Dota 2 quite a lot recently. The new international tournaments coming up for Dota 2. You know, and they release all kinds of new content. Compendium prizes, rewards. So it's always fun to get back into that and grind out some MMR with the rest of the guys.
I guess it's perfectly appropriate then. I know before we did the Final Fantasy VII episode, it was kind of funny that I had literally just been playing it, and there's really nothing better than being in the middle of playing something just before you're going to talk about it. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I've been lately just been on PS2 playing some old games like Devil May Cry. I have been playing Dota 2 somewhat a little, just kind of getting back into it. I was just on it the other day, and I saw like the international compendium, and I think that gets me a lot more excited to see, what's going to come of that. And I think I'll probably start to watch that as closer as it gets and probably get back into that. So,
If I can ask real quick, what is the International Compendium?
I think it's like an encyclopedia type database that sort of like lays out information about the upcoming
they
tournament.
Oh, I see. Okay.
They have the prize goals as more money goes on, more things are kind of unlocked for the players, and also as the players in the tournament, they gain prizes through that.
Everyone gets new hats. It's fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's an encyclopedia for hats, basically, is what it kind of boils down to. But with that said, I think we're ready to get into the actual discussion proper. I think we want to talk a little bit just about the history of the development of the genre, and then we're going to get into what makes it so exciting, talk a little bit about how much we individually like or don't like it, just give you some examples of some of the funnier, more memorable moments we've actually shared in the game. So real quick before I get into a brief history lesson, does anyone want to just kind of weigh in on their own start with the game or with the series, or do you want me to kind of do this first?
I'll weigh in just a bit. I mean, I think my experience with Dota has been slightly more casual than the rest of this group, but I got into Dota, and I suppose MOBAs in general. I'm beginning to look into the mobile MOBAs, actually, which surprisingly are better than I would expect. But I got into it through Warcraft 3 and through just searching for minigames after we would completely get our butts whooped in our team games, unfortunately. And so I think we all understand the need for another minigame that'll at least ease that pain for the time being. And I remember coming across Dota and trying it out and becoming instantly hooked. And this was long before I think it became a much bigger, larger scene in its own right.
Yeah, it was really funny sort of looking up the history of the genre because without question, the first time I was aware of this style of game was Dota, but apparently the progenitor of Dota was actually a game called Duke 2 for the Genesis, which of course I hadn't personally heard of, but apparently was like heavily known to be the main thing that inspired this entire play style, which was then in turn used as the basis of a custom map for StarCraft. I think that was in the late 90s, so quite a bit of time passed between this Genesis game and StarCraft map, but essentially an interest in this style of game had existed for quite some time. And then we got through the Warcraft 3 custom maps, which we all played Warcraft 3 quite a bit. In that game, you could, just like StarCraft, use a map editor to make your own custom maps that you wanted to play on or play with other people. And I guess the first guy that actually started to build the Dota interface as we know it now, username was Yule. And then from there, it passed on to people named Mayan, Gwinsu, and Ice Frog, all of which are names that are quite familiar.
I remember
now.
Ice well,
yeah.
very well.
All of which are names very familiar to players these days. But essentially, it was this map that I guess the guy Yule had first built, and then over time, interest in this style of game grew so much that different people added new items and content to it. It kept growing and growing. Popularity kept increasing, and there was just so much interest in it that people kind of just continued to grow it till it became, I guess, the Dota that we all first started playing and really loved. That was, I guess, at the time called Dota All-Stars. But it's for essentially people that don't know what this style of game is, it's each individual player, in the case of, I know, Dota, and I think most of them on a 5-player team, selects a single unit that can level up, buy items, and is essentially combating the team on the other side of the map made up of the same amount of people. So it's really sort of an RTS game without the multiple unit angle that focuses a lot on strategy, creativity, using money correctly. I mean, it's just very, very complex and simple at the same time, if that makes sense.
Oh, I think you summarized that well. One thing that's really simple that might help some people who aren't familiar with this is just Dota literally stands for Defense of the Ancients. And there's ancients, and there's a series of buildings, but also ultimately last building in the line is an ancient that needs to be protected, and once it's defeated by the other team, you lose. So that's where it comes from.
Yes, so that's like, I think with that, I think we pretty much summed up where this style of a game and this particular game came from and sort of the genesis of it all, no pun intended. But now I want to get in a little bit into when we all started individually playing and how we came to learn about it. I know personally the first time I ever think I played a game was at Andrew's insistence. As Steve mentioned, we were all playing Warcraft 3 as a team, and it was the kind of game that had a ton of replayability. It was always really fun to play. But when you suffered a couple bad losses, you kind of just wanted to play something else just to get your mind off of getting frostwormed to death, or as was the case, chimera to death quite a bit. So custom maps are always kind of a fun way just to unwind, play some more of the game, but not have quite the same level of stress and, I guess, despair that we felt when we lost. So Andrew showed me one time this game called Defense of the Ancients, which is a custom map that I didn't think a whole lot about. But then the more and more I watched them play it, I kind of realized there was actually something there. Do you guys remember at all, like the first times you played Dota?
Yeah, and I would probably say I started the Dota train within our group, just like you guys said. But yeah, I guess jumping into custom games like that were just so much easier, so much faster, a lot less pressure on you, and it was something that kind of took off the competitive edge for me. I know me as a gamer, I'm always competing, trying to get better. So something like that's good to get your mind off the competitive side of games and just have fun.
Yeah, I think the funny irony now is that, like, at the time, I know for certain we were doing it to get away from sort of that competitive streak we found in Warcraft, and yet Dota now, and especially over time, became just as serious, just as competitive, if not more so. Yeah. So what was at once sort of just like something to really unwind doing became probably the greatest source of video game related stress I've ever had. But at the time, it certainly was intended for that purpose first and foremost.
It is really fascinating how originally it kind of came across as a game that was essentially an RTS in which you didn't have to worry about controlling, a million different groups of units and organizing all that, and really just focusing on one unit. So it seemed much easier. And I think the level of timing and coordination involved in it now has almost developed to the point of something like a FPS in terms of the amount of reaction and really just accuracy and skill involved.
Do you remember at all, Mike, some early memories of playing the game or why you got into it initially?
I remember I was on the computer playing Warcraft 3, just like a random game, and after it, Andrew came downstairs and told me, try out this game called Dota. I'm like, I have no idea what this is. And I get absolutely smashed my first game. But over time, it kind of just really grew on me.
Yeah, there's something to be said just about how, at face value, the idea of just controlling one unit as opposed to an entire army offered this facade of simplicity that when you started to factor in the multitude of playable characters, the multitude of items, the different team strategies you could use, all the abilities, you very quickly realized that what seemed really simple on the surface was something that actually had a ton of complexity and a ton of depth. So while at first I kind of thought it was just sort of a fun pastime, I easily realized how much time could be spent really getting better at the game and learning more and more because it just offered so much. And that was back when, about maybe 2/3 of the roster that's now available was available. A lot of heroes weren't even out then. Yeah. Some items weren't even out then. I mean, we're talking about the game when it was at a much more basic form, and even then, it really had a lot of depth and a lot of options available to you. But as was the case, I guess, as we all found in how much we enjoyed the game, very quickly a lot of imitators followed suit. I remember kind of not being aware of anything else, really trying to copy Dota's style, and then all of a sudden a million seemed to come at once. I know the big one we're going to talk a little bit about now that a lot of people are familiar with is League of Legends. Obviously, it's one of the most played games in the world, but there might be some I'm forgetting, but I know there was Heroes of New Earth that was, like, for all intents and purposes, almost an exact copy of Dota with just different character and item names.
Heroes of the Storm.
Yep, Heroes of the Storm. And I think Heroes of the Storm is a funny case because I think Heroes of the Storm was actually, the legality of Dota was always an issue because Blizzard basically wanted rights to it because it was made using their software, but I guess IceFrog and the other developers of the actual map also felt like they had some rights. So basically Blizzard tried to obtain Dota and make an individual Dota game themselves, but they could never obtain the rights, so they just basically copied the formula and made Heroes of the Storm later.
There's something hilarious about the fact that Dota was effectively made on Blizzard's game Warcraft, and yet Blizzard could not claim those rights.
It's actually funny that you brought that up because a lot of hero names had to be changed, transferring from that Blizzard platform to, I guess, the new Valve and Steam platform. So there's a bunch of you'll be watching, and commentators will be calling these heroes by their aka Blizzard names, and you'd hear producers in the background, and yelling at them, saying they're not allowed to be saying that. So
I was also going to add, I do think that there's 2 other games that have come out that or are coming out that are worth talking about in relation to MOBAs, although I wouldn't consider them MOBAs proper. But so there's that game Battleborn, which is strictly speaking an FPS, but what's interesting is that it's an FPS where you're actually, you're leveling up every game. So in the way that Dota works, of course, you start out level 1 every game, and you progress every game, and you build them a certain way. It's the same type of thing, except it's in an FPS environment. So I think there's a lot of similarities to Dota, and I think Overwatch, a lot of people are very excited about that. I think that's also similar to Battleborn in that way, and to the rest of MOBAs in that way.
And I thought that was a cool development in the series. I've seen some people play. I guess it's in. They might both be in beta. People playing that, and I did always think when we played Warcraft 3 and then by extension Dota, that a first-person element added to the game was like the one big thing that could really throw a new kind of perspective in there that would really kind of take it to the next level. I didn't know how well it would work, but I did think it'd be cool to see. So I guess other people obviously felt the same, because I feel like Overwatch is sort of a first-person shooter Dota. I mean, as you mentioned, that's
from what I see from the beta and also from examples from Battleborn, it does seem like, whereas FPSs are normally fairly flat, they've been able to really allow you to adapt particular roles in those games. That really is the hallmark, I think, of Dota or RTSs. So
I know there's a crazy dwarf sniper guy with like a multitude of different catchphrases and like beards that you can choose, so that kind of sold me right away. But that I guess I'm a pretty easy sell. I think one of the reasons we all like Dota so much, especially the thing that hooked me from the early going, was the fact that it is such a quintessential team game where you really do need to understand the basics of the synergy between characters and really have a very strong and very sincere concept of strategy in order to play. If you play kind of willy-nilly, especially against decent players, you're just in for some pretty big trouble. So I'm going to kind of defer to Andrew and Mike more here, but I want to talk a little bit about just what makes Dota such a complex and balanced game, and why it's so important to play within the concept of team roles and use team strategy rather than just kind of doing whatever you want and running around. Because I know, firsthand from kind of doing whatever we want, just running around for fun, when we've gotten obliterated, and the games where we've kind of maybe illustrated our best case of teamwork across any game, it's really a night and day difference. So do you maybe just want to break down to the listeners kind of what the basic roles within Dota are and why it's so important that people play them?
Well, I was going to say, you've got over 90 heroes in Dota, just for starting. I think what makes Dota such a diverse game is that, just starting with 90 heroes, each of those heroes has their own special kind of role if they were to be picked on that team. And there are different, attribute specials. You got agility, intelligence, and strength. Strength is for can be tanks, they can be smart, spell casting people, and the agility is, the fast moving, agile, and can carry the game, which is kind of a little more in depth.
I guess just to add on what Michael was saying, it's a very complex, detail oriented game. That's why you have these guys or these teams, because I don't like saying one player is the best in the world, because it's a strictly team game. You'll have players that kind of sacrifice their space and their time and their money in the game, sacrifice that for their carry player. And everyone will think about that carry as being the best player on the team, but he's not necessarily that. He's just put in a good spot to succeed. But I guess along with that, for beginners, when we all played, we kind of picked heroes and played, and that's why it was fun. But now, every character in the game has a distinct role, a support role, jungling role, pushing role, carry, farming. It's very intense and detailed, and to see, I love just watching the game. I'm a huge fan of just watching these professionals. So when you see it all come together in kind of a symphony of skills, it's quite beautiful to watch.
Couldn't agree more, Andrew. I think one thing that might be helpful for those who haven't watched much League of Legends or Dota, would just be to understand that heroes really break down into, I would say, probably just supports and carries.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
Support, carry, and they'll say mid.
Right.
They're kind of tempo controlling heroes. Supports are obviously there to support the other characters, and the carries are heroes that they've determined that can get very strong with certain items and certain builds to
really scale into the late game.
Scale into the late game, and if you picked a certain hero, you expect him to carry your team, I guess, to a victory.
Yeah, and I think one of the mistakes I think a lot of people make, a lot of teams make, and certainly I've made a ton in my own history playing Dota, is just really trying to always be the most powerful guy, trying to always pick a carry, and slaughter everyone, while in fact you're not really allowing your team to be built in the right way, and you're not laning appropriately and all of that.
And that's one of the critiques I would say about the game is you're asking 5 strangers to join a game, and pick roles, and everyone needs to play with each other.
I mean, I think realistically, there's no one who, at least in the beginning, doesn't want to play the carry, right?
Exactly. So at lower MMR levels, you'll have 5 carries on one team, and everyone's trying to do their best to win the game. But it's just if the other team's got enough to pressure you early, then it's really it can be quite a headache.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention here that I guess the development of Dota, it did take place over a long period of time, but it really was interesting to see it go from this Warcraft 3 custom map that had no actual dedicated matchmaking or dedicated actual structure to it, to now Dota 2, which is developed by a lot of the same people, which is an entire separate piece of software by itself that has all the infrastructure of matchmaking. I know, having not played Dota 2 too recently, as Andrew just mentioned, I'm guessing there are still some relatively new players on there that do play in a manner that's not very akin to the professionals. But for the most part, when I played Dota 2, there was a larger percentage of people that knew what they were doing and took the game pretty seriously as compared to when it was a custom map. So back when it was a custom map, we'd play on Warcraft 3. You'd have games where it was pretty competitive and pretty even, but you'd have plenty of games where people were dropping out all the time. People were just playing idiotically, and it kind of every man for themselves. But Dota 2 sort of brought in, it narrowed down, it both narrowed the player base and expanded it. Expanded it in that the game's grown in popularity a lot now, and now it's really big. But I feel like it did consolidate a lot of the good players into Dota 2. So a lot of the games were just far more strategic and organized than back in Dota, where you could, in any given game, really not know what you were getting. Yeah. So these strategies really came into play a lot more, because whereas back in Warcraft 3, you could kind of just occasionally get away with doing completely insane stuff. In Dota 2, very often you'd either lose outright or your teammates would be furious if you played that crazy. So
it's definitely a different level up. Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah, no question. And I think maybe one of the best ways to maybe lay this out to people would be to reminisce about some of our favorite memories where the team element of Dota ended up being so important to us, either for better or worse, because to me there was really nothing ever more rewarding than, I'm trying to think of another word but synergy, but I think synergy is really just the best word for it, that seeing strategy, play style, and actual hero abilities come together in a manner that was perfectly executed and perfectly timed was just one of the most rewarding experiences I'd had in video games, where the first thing that stemmed to mind for me, and it makes me laugh just to think about it actually, but in the game, each of the characters you can choose have an ultimate ability, which you can use less regularly and is meant to be like their sort of one special super powerful attack that you're using sparingly. And in this one particular case, we chose 5 heroes, all of which had area of effect attacks that could hit multiple enemies at once. And we all kind of appeared against the enemy force at the same time and all used our ultimate attacks in like perfect synchronicity. So it literally devastating outburst of damage ever actually done in one spot. And, we had the added advantage of all being friends and sort of being able to talk, outside of the game to plan this big attack. But I can still just remember so vividly how hard I was laughing seeing this perfectly executed group teamwork, that it just absolutely like both perfectly demonstrated how devastating teamwork could be in the game and was just a really funny memory in terms of my overall gaming history. Is there anything that, I know there's probably lots of memories for all of us, but anything that comes to mind where we either really kind of, or it doesn't have to even be with us, it could be in a game you played otherwise, but where your teammates absolutely let you down or your teammates really helped you out?
I remember a game I was playing with you and Andrew, and I was Lion, and Andrew was Lena, and both their ultimates are like a single cast, lot high damage, and you can almost one shot any hero that early. But moving on into like the middle of the game, we both got Dagons, which is like an item, basically like another single burst kind of spell, but used as an item. And I think we were just one-shotting the entire team the entire game. And yeah, that's kind of my mode, which was probably the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, when you're working well with teammates, you can do stuff like that goes against conventional wisdom, but with the right execution can actually, especially in like a more casual game, A, be effective, but B, just be really funny, because you're basically creating like a situation in which you can, without question, kill any given hero at any moment if you so choose. And just seeing you guys run around the map and just, I think at the time we were screaming zap every single time someone got hit. And it was just hilarious to see someone go from full HP to instant death, which I think was causing some intense raging in the opponents. But no, I actually remember that pretty well too.
I will certainly own up to some of the more horrendous memories in this group. It's certainly my role in them at the very least. I can't speak for everyone, but in this group, despite my extraordinary skill at most games, I'd say I've been one of the lesser Dota players in the group, and I have a tendency to play bad heroes. So, most heroes in Dota definitely have their place and their time, but I managed to find usually the heroes that didn't even have that. And the one particular hero I'm thinking of that I got attached to for reasons unbeknown to me, Lich, actually. And so Lich is a hero, he's basically like this, literally a lich, but he uses ice on his opponents, and he has a really powerful ult called Chain Frost, which is really the only reason he exists in the game, to use his Chain Frost appropriately. Well, anyway, there was one particular game where I because Lich is such a fragile hero, you need to use him always in the context of a team and at the right time. But for some reason, I was wandering off on my own, and I encountered, I think it was a lone Juggernaut, and instead of running away as I should have done, I actually ulted on him, not realizing, of course, that Chain Frost, it only does damage according to how many enemies that are there. It needs to be able to bounce off of enemies. So my awesome Chain Frost attack, hit the Juggernaut once and did, some puny amount of damage. And the Juggernaut, of course, ulted me immediately, and basically did the equivalent of an Omni Slash to my heart. I died very quickly. Well, anyway, so when I did revive, the downside was not only did I get slaughtered, feed their carry, and make a fool of myself, but my ult wasn't even available to help our team, and without my ult, I actually was completely useless to our entire team. So I think I managed to fail in every possible way a Dota player could possibly fail.
And then when it was available again, I think we had like one golden moment in which you could have used it, but instead of actually casting it, you just kept saying, working on it.
I think something flew in your eye and you're playing with that.
I do remember you saying that at the time. So now whenever Steve's doing something that it isn't to our liking, we all just say, working on it, over and over to try to remind him of that memory. But he certainly wasn't the only one to have failings like that. I have more than I care to remember. Anything come to mind for you, Andrew?
I guess some of my fondest memories of Dota or even Dota 2 was just, us playing together and especially, trying to get our little brother Matthew to play or trying to get Justin, your third counterpart here on the show, trying to get him to play. They had some epic battles in that game together. And I for some reason, all I can remember is, Matthew on a tree, well, on a sniper, shooting Justin as a treant. And it was just repeated headshots.
There's something very iconic about the idea of Justin literally just being a tree who gets like riddled with bullets.
I think that hero fit him probably best as far as his spirit animal. I would say.
In as much as he has a spirit.
Yeah. If he does have one.
I also remember Justin playing a game of Axe, going for his first item as Heart, which is a late end game item, which takes like at least a half an hour to farm, even with axe. But it was just him running around the map with no boots and getting slaughtered.
Yeah, I think it can be a very important aspect of the game to remember that, and I think we're going to talk next about what makes League of Legends a little bit different, is that it's a very unforgiving game to people that don't know what they're doing very well. Not only because the people you're playing against tend to be very aggressive and very harsh to you, but also because the penalties for dying and playing poorly are so harsh that if you get behind, you really get behind, and it kind of snowballs into absolute misery. It's not a game where you can kind of find your way through and you'll eventually sort of stumble upon success. It really requires you learning a lot and executing properly, or else the losses really pile up pretty quickly. So it was always kind of funny when Andrew and Michael's younger brother Matthew, who at the time was quite young when we started playing, was by far the most aggressive of any of us, because you're really kind of punished and penalized pretty greatly for being overly aggressive and dying a lot. But any chance he saw to get a kill, he would just storm in against 5 people, and as long as he got that kill, it was always worth him dying.
Now,
Worth it.
What's been really interesting actually to see in Heroes of the Storm, I can't speak for other MOBA games that have come out, is they really took note of that, and they made it so that characters' levels are always the same on one particular team, a team games experience, and I don't really know how I feel about that. There's something, on one hand, when you have one particular character that can be like stopped in its tracks and another character that can be enormously powerful, it can be very harsh. But on the flip side, though, the ability to become way more powerful than anyone else, even on your own team, seems almost like a hallmark of the game. I don't know.
I can speak for Heroes of the Storm. I actually played that for a good solid 2 months with my friend Brian, and actually Heroes of the Storm it's a game of Blizzard's heroes, essentially. You got Thrall, Jaina, and Illidan.
Is Diablo in that?
He is, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I remember watching that then.
It is, like Steve said, everyone's level is the same on a team, but I think that has a lot to say for everyone working as a team. Like, the actual, maps, they have certain maps where a game mode, you have to kill creeps to gain gold coins, which can be contributed to a big pirate in the middle of the map called Blackheart, and if he gets a certain amount of gold, he can basically destroy the entire team's base.
From my limited experience playing Heroes of the Storm, I do think they really did the map dynamics well. I don't know, I'm not convinced of the rest of it, but I did enjoy what they did with the maps.
Yeah, I think there's I mean, from what I saw of it, there was just a lot more diversity in terms of what you could interact with on the maps rather than DotA, which, being such big fans of DotA ourselves is something that I became very accustomed to, but it was sort of cool to see the same type of game with a new twist, because even despite how much fun DotA remains for as long as it remains fun and how much replayability it has, it is sort of the kind of thing where, while each game can be very different, obviously the setting remains exactly the same. And
I mean, a lot of it has to do with, I think, how much emphasis you put on laning, actually. Mm-hmm. In Heroes of the Storm, I think it puts a little less emphasis on laning for the sake of different map elements that are really fascinating. But I do think that a hard emphasis on laning is actually a very good thing.
So maybe this is a good transition point, since we're talking about other entries in the MOBA genre than DotA, to talk about why it is that League of Legends, or at least why we think it is, that League of Legends has become such a juggernaut, not only of the MOBA genre, but of gaming in general. I mean, I don't claim to be that in the know about the competitive gaming scene. There's certain games that I follow competitively a bit, other games I don't, but I was really taken aback by the statistics of the player base and just the level of interest that exists in League of Legends. I mean, just to give you some idea of the number of people that play this versus other competitors, as of January 2014, it was estimated that 67 million individual players had played the game in the previous year. That was 7.5 million players simultaneously during peak hours, and roughly 27 million individual players entering per day, over the course of 1.3 billion hours of playtime between North America and Europe. So what those numbers mean in context is sort of hard to extrapolate, but it certainly seems like quite a lot. The next highest I found was DotA having, I think, somewhere between 7 and 8 million regular players during like a similar time span. So we're talking about a game that's not that far off from 10 times more popular than DotA, Do you guys have any insight into why that might be? Because I never really felt like anything was missing from Dota or Dota 2 that made me want to explore other games. But obviously there was something about League of Legends that people preferred because it's become such a massive game.
I actually played a few games of League of Legends. I mean, I'll always be a Dota 2 fanboy just because I'm just like, the League of Legends thing is like everything's like smaller. There's a lot more items, and I think League of Legends is more fun to people. I think because of the item standpoint, like you can combine items a lot, and like you can upgrade them, and you pay money to upgrade them. But I think I just think Dota will always be on top of League of Legends, even though League of Legends has the more people playing, you know.
It sounds like you just think Dota's a superior game,
Yeah,
regardless of the facts. All right.
Yeah. To weigh in a little bit on League of Legends, I've never played it. I've watched it. I watched their biggest or the last couple games of their biggest tournament. I forget what it's called, but I just remember some guy just dominating everyone. I forget his name. Some Korean guy.
It's freaking Korean.
Yeah, always dominating games. But from what I've heard and from what I've, I guess, read about League of Legends, it's an easy game to get into. They do a really good job with new player base. Whether it be giving certain characters items, giving them pretty hats or new coats or new weapons. They do a good job of that. They also make the game a little easier, I would say, at beginning levels. You're not denying, you're not too worried about dying, you don't lose gold from that. And then I guess moving into the whole competitive side of it, they've actually lost a lot of competitive players to Dota. The players seem to make more money with the whole player base kind of supporting these tournaments, throwing millions of dollars in them. But League of Legends players will get paid salaries, and that's how they think they want to build esports in the future.
That's really fascinating, actually, that point about salaries. I think you're right in general, Andrew, about, in a certain sense, League of Legends being easier. Of course, that's a controversial statement, especially coming from myself, having also not played League of Legends. But from what I've watched, I do have a sense that there's a much easier learning curve.
Yeah, and something I wanted to say, I guess the player base in League of Legends I've heard is a lot nicer and a lot more forgiving than the toxic people that play.
What fun is a nice and gentle player base?
Yeah, exactly. I don't understand it. I love getting yelled at by Russians and Peruvians every time I mess up.
I personally love to see Cam react to trash talkers.
Yeah, I mean, it is an opportunity both to talk about some of our funniest memories, but also to really give you a sense of, I'm sure you can find this across a lot of competitive games. I'm sure FPS games, are well known for having quite a bit of trash talk and quite a bit of absurd things being said, but just in our own experience playing Dota and Dota 2, it has some of the instances of the funniest reactions I've ever gotten from people online and the most, infuriating I can possibly...
Certainly the most disproportionate.
Without question. I mean, they really range from a guy that had his microphone on at all times and was just looping Creed for the entirety of the game. And when we tried to ban him from the game, he actually just started playing Creed louder and louder until he basically... And the funny thing was he was actually semi-helping our team at first. He was actually contributing while simultaneously trolling, but eventually it just reached a point where I couldn't even concentrate because it got so absurd. To people that spent the vast majority of the time just typing to the point where in the game, you can type quite a bit to your team or the enemy, but you're also playing the game simultaneously. So typing long sentences and phrases is kind of difficult while you're playing, but there were people that were literally typing small novels while you were playing of really either nothing but profanity or giant threats and insults. One guy was basically just warning us about what this other guy on his team was going to do and just kept saying, "Sven's coming for you, rage, rage," typing faster and faster until I think we were all just laughing too hard to even try to stop him. But
I think one particular moment I'll never forget actually was when I know I was with you, Cam, and it may have only been me and you of this group, but when we actually had to boot Matthew from one of our games, and how angry he was when we booted him.
Yeah, it's a game that can infuriate people to such an extent that Andrew and Michael's younger brother was playing with us, and he was doing so poorly, and we felt like he was hurting our team's chances so much that we literally kicked him out of the game. And he was in the room playing with us at the time. So he literally got up from his chair, started stomping on the ground, and actually disconnected the internet cables from how hard he was stomping. You can just get a sense, I think, just from that story in a microcosm, how much disdain and anger this game can
certainly foster.
Do you want to share the setup that we had in your room?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a really important part, not only to understanding, I think, our history gaming together, but just also to give you a sense of what the atmosphere was like when we were playing this game. Is I think the most I have, here in the house, 3 separate desktop computers all set up in one room, of which we would also add laptops. So at times we'd have a full 5-person team all sitting in like a 8-foot by 8-foot room, all communicating in person while we were playing. And often you're playing teams comprised of people that are playing online together. So while they'd be literally typing to each other, trying to formulate strategies on the fly, we'd all be sitting in the same room, all eating, drinking, yelling. It was basically just, sometimes we were focused and on point, but a lot of times it was just basically a war room of absurdity going on, which made our victories even sweeter, but made our losses even worse because and we were getting obliterated. A room of 5 people all yelling, typing over each other, knocking into each other. Created some of the most just insane, funny, and also fun gaming memories possible. And obviously, like on a competitive level at tournaments and stuff, when these people are playing together, they're all in the same room. It's not people in different parts of the world facing off. It's set up in an actual arena type setting. But it was always just fun for us to play that way because then we could actually interact in person while we were playing the game, and it made all the teamwork aspects a lot easier. So we've talked a little bit about it already. I think it's a perfect time to segue into just eSports and how that actual competition and competitive scene has grown so much, and also how big the MOBA genre is in eSports. Because, I think without even having to be into those in particular, we're all aware that there's, professional Call of Duty players, professional Street Fighter players. I don't know if people make a lot of money, but I know there's like pseudo-professional Smash Brothers players. I mean, any game that can be played competitively and is popular probably has a professional scene of some type. But esports have really become very MOBA-centric in a lot of ways, where a lot of the big money and big popularity and big notoriety in esports is in MOBA games. And I want to talk a little bit about with you guys why you think that is, and how insane it is that just during our lifetimes, gaming has gone from such a niche thing to being actually on ESPN2 as part of like a mini documentary. I mean, that's something I thought I would never see.
So I'll start out by suggesting, I think, one thing that I think MOBA games are the right length of time to enjoy watching, to enjoy commenting on, and to enjoy dissecting. I mean, usually I guess an average of about half hour, maybe sometimes verging on an hour at the higher end. But it really is just the perfect amount of time to like get pumped about a particular sequence of events and to talk about it and then to transition to a new game.
Yeah, and I guess that to add on to that, these MOBA games or these Call of Duty, these team-oriented games. These kids these days are playing that. They're growing up playing these games, and when they see these professionals, doing stuff 10 times better than they're doing, it gives them something to watch and to all over. I know for me, I play Dota. I just recently got into the 5K MMR bracket, but there's guys playing professionally that have just reached 9K. So to think that there's guys, twice as good as I am at a game, and I mean they are. You watch them, it's really turned into kind of a spectating sport. If it's something that you can watch and it's something you understand. Seeing these guys playing it at the highest level it's really fun to see.
I'd also just add, I think an excellent element. I think this is characteristic of all good games, honestly, but I think it's particularly characteristic of MOBA games. Is there's just really just a perfect balance between luck and skill, where you can never quite truly control the game the way you want, but nonetheless, the practicing and trying out particular strategies will eventually reward you over time.
Yeah, random number combinations like criticals going off, for instance,
Yeah.
or evasion happening are things in these games that even though you know is luck based, it still feels at times like everything's going against you when a crit does or doesn't go off, and that determines whether or not you live or die, or an evasion does or doesn't happen. And there were just so many instances where you really felt like you outplayed someone, but it just didn't turn out the way you wanted.
You can never quite eliminate that luck factor.
Exactly. Yeah. So just to give you an idea of the amount of money being put into the esports scene these days, I looked just at the top overall prize pools for a number of different games, and I was actually kind of shocked what I found, because I knew there was a lot of money in gaming now, and I thought it was probably pretty evenly distributed amongst different genres. But the biggest prize pool I could find for any Call of Duty, or at least any single Call of Duty tournament, was $1 million, which, $1 million is an absolute ton of money. But when I started to look further up the list, League of Legends had some tournaments where they had $2.3 million in the total prize pool. There was a couple Smash and Street Fighter tournaments that I think were $500,000. But then you got to the very top, and I was pretty much astonished to find that Dota 2, the international tournament last year, had a total prize pool of $18.4 million, which not only is an insane amount of money in general, but absolutely dwarfs the next highest thing on the list, which I know you guys opened the show talking about it, and it's a really cool thing to touch on again, is most, if not all, of that money that's being raised for the actual prize pool is coming from the player base when they're buying things, these compendiums and other, sponsoring the game in other ways, which means that the game is kind of, it's combining this new element of crowdfunding where as something becomes more popular and people enjoy it, if that means they're getting more of what they want. So the game creators are actually not having to shell all this money out. It's being generated from within the game's own popularity, and then that amounts to an absolutely insane prize pool for these tournaments.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact, I think Dota 2 has really found the right demographic of players. Not all games end up with the right audience and the right players that they need, but I think Dota 2 has found that tier of serious players who are verging on professional, or if not professional themselves, are nonetheless interested in professional players.
When you said verging, I thought you were going to say virgins. Professional players who are virgins who hate sex but love MOBA.
I'm certainly not ruling that out.
Probably a lot of them.
So yeah, this is something we talked about off air, but I thought it's a really interesting point. I know Andrew can elucidate this a bit, but I think a really interesting aspect of the esports scene is how international it is. Obviously the tournament itself is called the International, but it really is a game with international appeal that is played. I'm sure there's parts of the world where it's not particularly popular, but I know for a fact North America, Europe, and the Far East are all pretty crazy about it. And you were saying, you could kind of almost summarize a lot of these parts of the world as having very distinct play styles. Is that something you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'll just touch on it real quick. Like you said, we were talking about it before we got on air here. But yeah, the demographic of certain regions in the world have a typical style of play. You'll have the Chinese teams that focus primarily on being efficient and farming, waiting for the right time to push their advantage. Then you'll have European style of play that focuses more on being aggressive, like right from the start. They'll be pressuring mid lane, they'll be pressuring carries to really force you into mistakes. And then you'll have North American style that's kind of a blend of everything. Evil Geniuses won the last international, and they're known for being probably the best individual skilled players, but they found a way to, I guess, incorporate all those styles of playing into the best style of play.
Yeah, while we're talking about esports, I think at least a few of the listeners probably have already heard of Evil Geniuses because they play other games quite as well. And I'd be curious to hear your own opinion, Andrew. What really set them apart, at least recently, that they were able to come out on top?
They've actually recently changed their roster twice since they won the international, which just goes to show you how much of a team game it is. They're trying to find these guys who are great individual players. That doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the right fit for your team. They may have had recently two of probably the top skilled players in the world in Arteezy and the the boy wonder Sumail, who pretty much won the international for him for that team. But they just seemed to clash, and Arteezy went on to another team, Team Secret, which is a team of all stars, but they're having a really hard time winning tournaments right now. So it just goes to show you how much of a team game this is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing.
I think it's really interesting to watch. Like the Chinese play against the Russians and the Russians play the Americans. Vice versa. The one thing I can say about the Chinese is that they're very, very, very probably the most skill oriented out of different parts of the world, and I think Russians are just a bit under them, and Americans kind of, I don't know, they're kind of, I don't see them as the most skill-oriented kind of team, but it is very, very interesting to watch these guys play.
Now I'm just picturing Michael wearing a China jersey, Andrew wearing an American jersey, and just watching this duel. This can be a question for everyone, but I was going to ask you, Michael, because I was curious what you were going to say. With the international appeal of this game and the MOBA genre in general, all the money being invested into it and the rise of things like Twitch, that's really bringing a lot of it's making gaming even more pervasive, even more readily available, and even more lucrative than it was before. Where do you guys see this sort of continued expansion of competitive gaming going in the future? I mean, do you ever see a day where North America and Europe have dedicated channels on actual regular TV like they do in the East? Or have esports kind of gotten as popular and expensive and lucrative as they're probably going to get?
That's a pretty good question. I don't see it happening anytime soon, but I think in the future when technology gets more advanced, I think when people start to lean more on technology and just TV, watching things. I mean, I can say for myself that I'm on Twitch almost every day watching things, like World of Warcraft. I watch DotA 2 a lot, and just old games, like some people playing Final Fantasy 7. But I think Twitch is probably like one of the best things to happen to gaming, just kind of showing people what these people have to offer to their community, showing what the game is to new people, and for people who've been playing a lot, they learn a lot of new things out of this. Like, you can't go over to this random person's house and watch them play. I think this is Twitch is it's a whole new thing.
Yeah, I mean, if I have my own issues with Twitch and things I really like about it, but if there's one thing that I do like about it a lot, is if you're using it as a means by which to recapture that feeling of hanging out with your friends and playing a game together that we all grew up on and we all really loved. That is harder to do these days because of a number of reasons. But if that's the closest approximation you can get to actually experiencing games with someone else, then by all means, I think that's awesome, because there's lots of games that really are aided greatly by experiencing them that way. And not everyone has friends that just, hang out and play through, a 60 to 100 hour game with. That's a very demanding thing to ask of someone. But if you're using it that way, I'm all for it.
I just want to add to that question about, have esports reached their pinnacle, if you will. I would suggest that they have not yet reached their pinnacle. And I would suggest that the pinnacle you mentioned, the idea of having its own dedicated TV channel, is far from what they could be, actually. That just imagine moving into a world in which we actually have augmented bodies and we can play Dota ourselves as the heroes. All right, I think you guys are thinking too small scale about this. There's a lot of potential of what esports could really be.
Are you bringing Stephen Hawking onto the next show?
I mean, I hear Stephen Hawking would have been a damn good Dota player.
I mean, with the popularization and the new implementation of virtual reality, your idea might not be quite as far-fetched as it.
But I'm not talking about virtual reality. I'm talking about reality.
Yes, but I'm talking, there are steps in between where we are now and there. But we did this for the Smash Brothers episode. I really liked talking about it because, often when we're discussing these games or these genres or just these ideas, we're talking a lot about our feelings about something and the history of these things, but not actually all that much about literally playing them. So I thought it'd be a fun point here to both give some people some ideas of little tips and tricks we could share or hints about the game, or just talk a little bit about our own personal play styles, just to give you a sense of the way we like to play, maybe help out new players, or maybe add something new to someone who's already pretty experienced. So I'm going to defer to you guys for the most part. All I would really say is, if you want to get into Dota 2 especially, I can't vouch as much for the other games, but I imagine it's similar. start very humble, very modest, and learn to play a role that isn't all that. I don't want to say intensive because a lot of the characters in the game are intensive anyway, but that isn't such an absolute crux of your team that you can take on a more reserved, as they call it, support role and let other people who are more experienced do the heavy lifting. Where if you're just willing to learn, basic things like buying wards for your team or primarily, healing and protecting the rest of your teammates, you'll learn the game better while not having to take on such a central role. And trust me, it's more fun losing despite having pretty modest stats than starting right off trying to get 15 kills a game but going 0-20. It's not the kind of game you should really be diving into trying to dominate from the onset.
Yeah, Cam, I just want to echo exactly that, and I think that was one of my main mistakes as a player in Dota was just not being flexible enough. I think I came from a background, particularly thinking of EverQuest, of always being the min-maxer who has a very specific build he wants to execute perfectly, and Dota's a game just because of luck, because of team dynamics. You really just can't get too attached to one particular way of playing. You need to be willing to play whatever role your team needs.
So with that, we'll leave it to you guys to maybe lend some of your expertise. It doesn't have to be, or it can be as specific or general as you want, but I think it's always helpful just to lend sort of a couple tips to people. I
think the thing that helped me improve the most was watching the pros. It's just when you kind of like when I first kind of started playing Dota, I didn't realize these new things, these new styles. And when I went and saw a pro game, they just take everything that they know and use that to their advantage. But I think Andrew can probably say something.
My advice for new players would just be mute everyone. Do your best to help your team, but don't read too much into the things you're going to hear from other players or even the other team, because all they're going to try to do is knock you down.
What about the development of your trash talking skill?
My trash talking skill is at an all-time high. I really play mental games the whole time. I really don't play as much as attack people's heads.
Would you say though that the ability to trash talk is as important an element of playing?
It's one of the, I would say, benefits of playing Dota 2. It really, if you having a bad day, out at your job or you're out at the mall and that clown with the balloons is really pissing you off. You can really let him have it with some dank memes or some cool hats.
So maybe newer players should mute everyone, but still cuss the heck out of them, right?
Yeah. I mean, and Dota, like every other game, has their specific, 3-2-2 or uninstall the game, you effing noob, or they'll have there's certain phrases that can really get under your skin, but I've learned to kind of deflect all of them.
To give listeners a good idea, I actually remember the exact words that were the last thing I heard during my last ever Dota. I want to say maybe 5 to 6 months ago at this point. But, obviously you can type to people or you can talk by microphone. And I was playing a support character in that given game. We lost by a landslide, but for some reason the one guy on our team didn't want to admit it. But the last words I actually heard before I last played were, "Grave me, you fucking goon." At which point I decided it was probably time to take a little bit of a break from Dota. Haven't been back to play since, but needless to say, if you're someone who's easily discouraged by people really berating you, you're going to have a really hard time playing Dota because it can be quite merciless at times.
Yeah, that definitely has a toxic... I mean, there's guys or girls out there that are playing that really are out there to have fun. And you'll see that at lower levels or beginning levels. People are on there that have fun, get upgrading their characters, getting new cosmetics for them. It's fun. It kind of adds a MMO type feel to that MOBA. But again, as you progress through games, just don't be too upset about losing games. You're gonna win games. You're gonna lose games. As long as you're having fun, that's all that matters.
Yeah, you're gonna have bad teammates. It's. I think that's something to just look into as you go into a game. You're like, I'm gonna have bad teammates this game, but there's also that you also need to see what your teammates can do for you and what you can do for them. I think that's a big part of Dota, as having bad teammates. Kind of like see what you can do off of what they're not good at. So
I know my last tip, of course, would just be when you do play Lich, if you do, Just make
Make
sure
there's 2 enemies.
Make sure there's at least 2 enemies before you chain frost.
Yeah, I can personally vouch for the number of times Mike just texted me out of the blue and said, "These effing teammates." It's probably about 100 to 150 texts at this point, so that can be very frustrating, but try to bear with new people if you're experienced so that more people can enjoy the game. And if you are new, just be willing to put up with some of the learning curve because it's there for everybody. There's no way to really get around it. We're at just over an hour, so I guess we can wrap up unless you guys want to share any final thoughts about the genre or good job of talking about our own personal history with it and a bit about what makes the genre cool in and of itself. So the floor is your guys if you guys want to say anything before we start to wrap up.
I was just gonna say thanks for having me on here. I love what you guys are doing. I've listened to all the episodes. So again, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I also want to say thanks, Cam, for having me on here. I think I've never really had to get or had one of these discussions kind of talking about Dota or just MOBAs in general. I think it's a lot of fun. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Well, and I'll say thank you guys for coming. It's truly an honor to be in the presence of such esteemed Dota players as yourselves.
Yeah, I mean it's I want to thank you guys sincerely, not only because you're both very important in my own gaming history and I feel like it'd be hard to talk a lot about most of the gaming I did without you guys being involved, but also because, as Michael just mentioned, it's really fun to sort of, we've all talked so much, obviously off air and in our own time, about these games, but when you take the time to really sit down, focus on one thing in particular, you do get people's opinions in a more complex and more in-depth way. And it's just really interesting to hear what people are going to say because I know we all enjoy this stuff and we've talked quite a bit about it, but you kind of do learn new stuff about people and what they think just by doing this. So I know, at least on our end, we intend to have you guys back a couple times because we're going to be talking about a number of games that I think you guys would have a lot to say about. I know amongst them Final Fantasy Tactics, Warcraft 3 as a whole, because even though we touched a little bit about on how it pertains to Dota, Warcraft 3 as its own entity and really the Warcraft series is something we could easily do a whole new episode on. So there's a lot of stuff we could definitely do. I think we plan on doing as long as you guys want to. So thank you so much. Shout outs have been briefer lately because we got a lot of the administrative sort of thank yous out of the way up early, but I do want to thank the people that have already subscribed over on YouTube. We're still on our quest for 100 subscribers, at which time we're going to do a gaming giveaway and a Q&A video. We got another subscriber yesterday. Thank you to whoever subscribed. We want to reach 100 because we can actually get a dedicated YouTube URL once we get 100. Without that, it's just some crazy long combination of letters and numbers that I'm never going to sit here and repeat to you. But yeah, keep subscribing if you enjoy us, share. We really appreciate it so much. I want to give a shout out to all the wonderful people that are willing to play supports in MOBAs. There aren't enough people out there that are willing to die for the greater good and help the team win. So to all the vengeful spirits, the dazzles, the dark seers, my heart goes out to you. I know your pain because I was amongst you most of the time I was playing, but it really takes people like you to make up the backbone of good teams. So
yeah, those KDs get ugly after a while.
I could actually say I played a game of Dota yesterday and I did play Vengeful Spirit, and I did not feel your pain. I actually carried the game,
so it gives you a sense of
Gives you a sense really of Michael's humility, I would say.
Well, you get a sense of the fact that even playing one of the more capable supports in the game, Michael is still incapable of actually supporting. But that's a lesson for another time. Thank you guys so much. To anyone who hasn't experienced MOBAs before, I can honestly say, and I think I speak for everyone in saying, they can be such a fun thing to do, whether you're playing with friends or other people, because the games are just so dynamic. They're so exciting. Winning really feels earned. Losing really feels pretty brutal, so it really engenders a really strong desire to win. So whether you want to play Dota 2, League of Legends, Heroes of the Storm, one of the other options, there's good stuff out there for you. We'll be back soon for you. Thanks for listening as always, and take care.
See ya.
Thanks for having us.